Alright, so now I'm going to rank the greatest power forwards of all time. So I have the ranking here. This is top 1 to 10, who I think is top 1 to 10, then top 10 to 20, top 20 to 30, and then below top 30 or 30 to 40, however you want to think about it. And I have a whole bunch of the greatest power forwards on the side here to the right, and I'm going to be doing this live and kind of ranking them and showing you guys why I'm ranking them in the places I am. So here we go. I already did a video on point guards and shooting guards and small forwards already, so now it's time for the power forwards. All right, so let's go picking guy. So we got Buck Williams here. Buck Williams was, I think he's actually considered the top Nets scorer still of all time. So yeah, he's definitely one of the greatest Nets players ever. Actually, maybe the top rebounder as well. So yeah, he just played a really long time for the Nets, I think, because not many players play that long for the Nets, I guess. So yeah, he's the top net scorer, top rebounder, also good defensive player as well. But I can't really consider him like a really, really good power forward, like a top 31, because he wasn't really that dominant in his prime. Um, he was just like a star, right? So I'm just going to put him here below top 30. Yeah, so that's where Buck Williams is. And then next up, I have Harry Gallatin. Harry Gallatin, I will put him below top 30 as well because even though he was like the top power forward on those Knicks teams of the 50s, um, I'm not really sure like if he's as good talent-wise as any of these top 10 guys, right? And his impact on his era is good. Like he was like 7-time All-Star or something like that. So which is why he's on this list. But I just don't think he's top 30 material. So Harry Gallatin's here as well, below top 30. Right, next up, I have Bob Love. I'm going to put Bob Love actually in the top 20 to 30 category because he was the best or second best player on those 70s Bulls, which were actually pretty good. They just never reached the finals. But yeah, Bob Love, pretty good scorer, pretty good defensive player. Um, just he wasn't and he was actually the leader of that team, I think, but he wasn't like the leader of a top tier team. That's the thing, right? But anyways, he's still 20-30. Rasheed Wallace, I'm going to put to below top 30 as well because he wasn't the best player on any of those Pistons teams or even the second best player, but he was a solid defensive presence and just a solid fundamental player that was a good contributor to those teams. So yeah, Rasheed Wallace definitely deserves to be up here in the conversation for greatest power forwards, just not maybe not top 30. Right below top 30 though is Wallace. All right, and next up we got Larry Nance. Larry Nance, solid player for the Suns. Just again, I don't consider him like really like superstar level guy. Just a really solid star player. So I'm gonna put him below top 30 as well. You know, didn't really win anything. Just a pretty solid star player and contributor, um, and a good dunker as well. And same thing, Horace Grant. Again, part of those first three-peat of the Bulls championship teams, and also part of the Lakers in his the second half of his career, and also part of the Magic that went to the finals. So just his teams won a lot. He had a lot of good success as just a contributor and a good third option on a team, right? So I wouldn't consider him like a superstar level player either. Just a good defender, good contributor on those Bulls teams and a lot of those championship and finals bound teams. So just a solid player, but not really top 30 level because you know he wasn't really a superstar or alpha leader type of guy. All right, Tom Chambers, interesting. I would actually put Tom Chambers 20-30. Very good offensive player, not so good on defense. He's actually considered one of the worst defenders, but definitely offensive wise, Tom Chambers has to be up there. Scored over 20,000 points. Um, yeah, definitely. I think Tom Chambers, as just an offensive player on the strength of his offense, he's got 20-30. But yeah, he didn't win anything with his teams and, you know, wasn't like a superstar level player. But that's where he is. Same thing, Sean Kemp, 20-30. Very athletic guy. Second best player on a lot of those Sonics teams with Peyton. Went to the finals, right, to face against Jordan in 96. But yeah, I think just for that, he's a top 20-30. Right, second best player on a lot of the Sonics teams, and just a very good player, rebounder in his prime. Right, is pretty solid player and dunker especially. Right, very well known for his dunking. super athletic. All right, next we got Elton Brand. Elton Brand is, I mean, he's a solid star for the Clippers early in his career. But now I think he wasn't really like a superstar level guy. Even though on the Clippers he was considered the best player for many years, but those Clippers teams weren't that great. So yeah, I'm actually gonna have to put him below top 30. Yeah, because he's just another one of those solid players, just like Larry Nance. Solid player, decent stats, just wasn't wasn't superstar alpha dog level type of player that won or anything. Okay, Bob Pettit has to be a top 10 guy. Just clearly one of the best players of his era, not just power forwards, but just one of the best players of his era, right? 2 MVPs, 2 scoring titles, averaged 26 and 16, which is a ridiculous stat line. The only guy to beat Bill Russell in the finals. Yeah, he was the only team. The Hawks were the only teams to beat Bill Russell's Celtics in the finals during that time. And yeah, just a very, very good player. Solid rebounder, good scorer, and would have had a Finals MVP if they had him back then. So just in strength of his accolades, his stats and awards and stuff, he has to be top 10 all time. Right? He has to be up there. Just considered one of the top players of his era. I think after, so not including Russell and Wilt, we're just talking about white players. After Mikan, probably Mikan and Pettit were considered the best white players of their time, and then Cousy after that, right? So Bob Pettit has to be up there. Okay, Maurice Lucas. This one's a little bit hard. Maurice Lucas, second best player on the 77 Blazers championship team after Bill Walton. So that means something. And then he played in the ABA too, where he was a star. So yeah, I'm going to put him top 20 to 30, right? Because being the second best player on a championship team is something as well. And his stats are okay. And then, yeah, he's multiple all-time All-Star. So I'm just put him 23. Maurice Lucas has to be up there. Bailey Howell. Oh, this one's interesting as well. Bailey Howell won 2 rings as part of the Celtics, but he was also a pretty solid player for the Pistons as well earlier in his career. But yeah, I think he was considered one of the best power forwards of his time, along with Jerry Lucas and Dave DeBusschere. So yeah, I think he belongs in this spot. He was like a level below DeBusschere because he wasn't as good DeBusschere defensively, and he wasn't as good as Lucas like offensively. So, but he's still really good. Like he's kind of in between those two, right? Like he's a solid scorer and a solid rebounder. Just wasn't as good at rebounding as Lucas and wasn't as good on defense as DeBusschere. Just pretty solid for his time though. So that's why he's 20-30. All right, Tim Duncan. Obviously, this is easy, right? Greatest power forward ever. 5 rings, 2 MVPs, 3 Finals MVPs. Dominated in 3 different decades. I mean, yeah, what can you say? Duncan has to be top 10. So that was easy. Another interesting one, Spencer Haywood. I put him top 10 to 20 because the thing about Spencer Haywood is when he was in his prime, he was really good. Yeah, so Spencer Haywood actually won an MVP in the ABA, his only season that he played there. I think it was his rookie season. He played in the ABA, won an MVP there, and then went back to the NBA and still put up pretty good stats. He put up 20 and 10, multiple-time All-Star, multiple-time All-NBA. So yeah, just based on his stats and awards and accolades, I think he definitely deserves to be top 10 to 20 in this range. I know a lot of people they underrate Spencer Haywood. They don't know much about him, but in his prime, he was pretty good. Just a solid 2010 player, right? So that's where I'm putting him. And actually, I'm going to move Bailey Howell up here as well because, like I said, I think being between Lucas and DeBusschere, that's where Howell is. But I wouldn't say that he's necessarily worse than them. So he might be on the same level, just on his strengths are a little bit different. But yeah. Let's go move him. I'm going to move him up there a little bit. Okay, so next we got Chris Bosh, and I'm going to put Chris Bosh in the 10 to 20 range as well. Probably towards the end of this range, because Bosh was a pretty good shooter for a PF, and was the best player. He was an alpha dog on the Toronto team. on the Raptors, and then became a third option on the Heat team and was able to delegate. So that's pretty impressive. And then he won 2 rings with the Heat, right, being their third best player. And yeah, his career stats and totals are about where I would put him in this range, top 10 to 20 range, and 10-time All-Star, or actually 11-time All-Star, I think. So yeah, he has to be somewhere around here. Amari Stoudemire I'd put right beside Chris Bosh, because Amari didn't have as long of a career as Bosh did because of his injuries, but in his prime, he was probably better than Bosh. In Amari's prime, he's multiple-time All-NBA, more than Bosh was. Bosh was only one-time All-NBA. So Stoudemire is probably better in his prime. Bosh probably had the better career. In the end, they probably even out to be very close to each other. And then the stats are pretty similar, even though they're different types of players. Bosh was a better shooter. Amari played with more post-game. But yeah, both of them are probably around this range. Gasol I'd put around here as well. Second best player on those late 2010s Lakers teams. Yeah, I mean, Gasol is also a very good contributor. He was the best player, actually, the alpha dog on the Memphis Grizzlies. And then when he went to the Lakers, became the second best option. So, that's definitely worth something. And I think he definitely deserves to be around this range as well. I think, yeah, Bosh, Amari, Gasol, they're all pretty good, all pretty close to each other. And then I'm going to put, this is Jerry Lucas, and I'm going to put Jerry Lucas very close here as well, because Jerry Lucas was one of the top power forwards of his time. Probably after Pettit, considered the next best power forward. So he was excellent at rebounding, right? His strength was rebounding. He averaged over 15 rebounds a game for his career, which is amazing. He's called the computer because he's one of the most intelligent players to ever play in the NBA. So yeah, definitely Jerry Lucas deserves to be out there. He was also a pretty good shooter as well for the time. He was one of those pioneering outside shooting big men, which wasn't common at the time. So yeah, he was definitely like way ahead of his time in that sense. And yeah, can I say good shooter, excellent rebounder, and then it became a solid contributor to those Knicks teams later on. All right, we're gonna put this guy, Vern Mikkelsen. Vern Mikkelsen was, along with George Mikan and Jim Pollard, part of the early 50s Minneapolis Lakers front court. Mikkelsen was probably slightly better than Pollard, although they were very similar. Both of them were very similar in stats and awards. So I think Mikkelsen may be slightly higher because he was on more All-NBA teams, but it's difficult to rank this guy. I'm going to put him here for now, right? I know he's a solid, probably the second or third best option, depending on where he and Pollard was. Pollard tended to be a little bit better in the playoffs, and then Mikkelsen a little bit better in the regular season, so it kind of evens out. But I'm going to put him there for now. Again, we're talking early 50s NBA, so it's very hard to rank these guys. Larry Keenan, second best player on the ABA Nets after Dr. J, and then became a solid player for the Spurs. Not like a superstar level player, like a solid second, third option contributor type of guy. Also going to go here along with those other guys. So Larry Keenan, I think most people forget about this guy, right? Because he played in the ABA in the 70s, but yeah, solid player too. LaMarcus Aldridge, I'm going to put in the top 20-30. It's just like these other guys here. Multiple-time All-Star, like a solid 20 and 10 guy in his career. Just didn't really win anything because didn't go very far in the playoffs. But pretty solid contributor all around and was the alpha dog for his team at the time, right? You got to remember Damian Lillard became the alpha dog after LaMarcus Aldridge left. So LaMarcus was initially the alpha dog for that team. So that's where I'm putting him. And then, George McGinnis, I'm going to put in the top 10 to 20 as well. Like Spencer Haywood, won an MVP in the ABA and similar stats, except he was a better passer. So he averaged like 20 and 11. So yeah, just like similar to Haywood, he was a 2010 kind of guy, but also put up more assists, like 4 assists a game as well. And Finals MVP for the Pacers as well, because he won 2 rings with the Pacers and Finals MVP. Kind of a stat machine when he was with the ABA. Yeah, once he went to the NBA, he was still pretty solid with 76ers. Became the second best player on those on the 77 76ers that went to the finals. But then he kind of declined very fast after that, after he left the 76ers. So, yeah, anyways, he's a top 10 to 20 kind of guy, George McGinnis. All right. Next up, I have, these guys all a bit hard to rank. Dave DeBusschere is going to be in the top 10 to 20 as well. Because, so Dave DeBusschere wasn't as much of a shooter as Jerry Lucas or Bailey Howell. These guys are more efficient. Played in the same era, the 1960s. Also played on the Pistons. That's where he had his prime years. And also became a contributor for the Knicks. So he has that in similarity with... he has part of that similarity with Bailey Howell and part of that similarity with Jerry Lucas, right? So he actually became Jerry Lucas's teammate. And then he actually, Jerry Lucas moved to center to play center, even though they're both naturally power forwards. And then he played for the Pistons after Bailey Howell. But the thing about DeBusschere, he wasn't as good of a shooter as Lucas or Howell, but he was probably not as good of a rebounder as Lucas, but probably just as good of a rebounder as Howell was. But his defense is what puts him up here, right? So he was like 10-time All-Defensive, so that's got to be worth something. Very, very good defender for his position. So being one of the best defenders of his time and being a key part of that New York Knicks dynasty, that's what I have to put him in the top 10 to 20 because of that. Yeah. So probably after Frazier and Reed, he was probably the third best player on that Knicks dynasty. All right, let's get some of the easy ones out of the way first. Karl Malone, obviously top 10. Second leading NBA scorer of all time. Averaged 25 and 10 for like 18 seasons, which is incredibly impressive. Just his durability, his longevity. Yeah, I mean, Karl Malone has to be up here, right? Just everyone knows Malone is one of the best power forwards ever, even though he didn't win anything. But just his durability, longevity, and his impact on his scoring and rebounding. Yep. And his presence as just like a very he would like brutalize opponents, right? Because he was so buff, right? And he has that elbow, so it was hard to guard him. So anyways, he has to be top 10. Charles Barkley, very similar. A lot of people compare Barkley and Malone. Malone had the better career because he had more longevity. Barkley had the better prime and the better peak, and also a better passer than Malone was. So they're both ranked around the same. But anyways, Barkley is also top 10, obviously. He's one of the greatest power forwards ever. Better at his peak than Malone was, but yeah, very, very solid player. MVP, of course. Malone also won 2 MVPs to Barkley's 1. So anyways, both top 10, obviously. Dirk Nowitzki also has to be up here. Obviously, another top 10 power forward. Best player on the 2011 Mavs championship team. And yeah, one of the pioneers, I would say, of the big shooting big men, right? So this is before, but now like it's all like become with the stretch 4s, stretch 5s, you know, now every big man's shooting. But Dirk Nowitzki was kind of the prototype, I guess, shooting big man. Wasn't a typical power forward of his time, right? The typical power forward of his time would be like a Amar'e Stoudemire, right? But Dirk Nowitzki was a little bit different. He kind of paved the way for the current stretch 4s, I guess. So Dirk has to be up here, though. Yeah, definitely one of the best power forwards ever. Okay, I think these other guys are hard to rank too. Dolph Schayes has to be top 10 because Dolph Schayes was not as good as Pettit. You know, Pettit's obviously better than Schayes, but Schayes still has to be up here because after Pettit, he was considered probably the next best guy. And still averaged like 18 and 12 in his career. Still, you know, many All-Star selections, many All-NBA selections, and led the Syracuse Nationals to a title in 1955 as the best player. Would have had a Finals MVP. So, you know, that's all worth something. So that's why Schayes has to be top 10, even though he's not as good as Pettit. Kevin Garnett has to be top 10, right? Some consider him better than Duncan at his peak. Just he didn't have the teammates that Duncan had, but in any case, I think Garnett was slightly better defensively at his peak. I mean, Duncan's a good defensive player as well. Duncan's a great defensive player, but Garnett was also a great defensive player and won Defensive Player of the Year. Also, better rebounders by a slight margin, right? Led the league in rebounding and passing as well. So Garnett's also probably a slightly better passer than Duncan as well. Duncan had the more polished game, though. Duncan had the more polished game, but I think Garnett would be very close to him, at least in the awards and stats. So except for the rings, right? Garnett only won one ring. Duncan won 5. Garnett only has 1 MVP. Duncan has 2. Um, but I would say definitely Garnett belongs in the top 5 discussion. So that's why, obviously he's top 10. Elvin Hayes has to be in top 10. He is one of the greatest. Actually, he's also very, very durable, just like Malone. So that's what made him like top 10 in scoring all time, I believe, and also top 10 in rebounding as well. So just like Malone, he had incredible longevity, and yeah, just scored a lot of points, rebounded a lot. Was probably the best power forward of the 1970s. So being the best power forward of your generation has to be worth something, right? So that's why he's in the top 10 there. Giannis, where did I put Giannis? I put Giannis in the top 10 to 20 for now, because his career is just starting, but we can see with his career where he's going, and he's going to end up his career probably in the top 10. But for now, he's top 10 to 20. He has 2 MVPs. He's got ridiculous stats. Yeah, he's just a really, really great player that kind of does everything on the floor. Also, a very good defensive player as well, because he won Defensive Player of the Year this year. So yeah, definitely in the future, I think Giannis has a good chance to crack the top 10. But for now, he's in the top 10 to 20 along with these guys. All right, Kevin McHale. Actually, the interesting thing about Kevin McHale, I think he might actually be top 10. So maybe I might put him top 10. Because Kevin McHale in his prime was really, really good, especially with all his post moves. Probably has the most post moves out of any player not named Hakeem Olajuwon, right? He was also a 6-man, which is why his stats don't look that great because he was like a 6-man for the first part of his career. But when he became a starter, and then this was before his injury, he got injured really fast after he became a starter. So that's why his prime is really short. But when Kevin McHale was in his prime, he was really, really good. Just a very polished defensive player, very good in the post, and a very good defender as well. So I think Kevin McHale is kind of fringe top 10, but I think I'll put him in the top 10. Yeah. And then, so we got, 9 guys here. Anthony Davis is interesting. I wonder if Anthony Davis could be a top 10 right now after winning his first ring with LeBron James. I think actually I will put Anthony Davis in the top 10 as well, but probably near the bottom of the top 10. Anthony Davis is very, very polished, and I think, yeah, he's definitely one of the, if not the best big man of his generation, right? I guess you could consider Anthony Davis the best big man right now in the game. And he's good offensively, he's good defensively, he's a two-way player. Yeah, I just think he's got a very solid, polished all-around game. And after winning his first ring with LeBron, I think that's pushed him into the top 10 for me. So I think Anthony Davis has now cracked my top 10. So I think, but he's just like right there at like number 10 probably. So yeah, so that's where AD belongs. As for these other guys, okay, Dan Issel has to be in the top 10. And the reason is because if you count his ABA career, which I do, he's actually number 11 all time in scoring, and he almost never missed a game. He's just like Karl Malone and Elvin Hayes. He just played a lot of games, very, very durable. Scored like 22 points and 9 rebounds, had 9 rebounds, every game. So yeah, 22 and 9 without missing a game for like 16 seasons. So yeah, I mean, when you do that, when you have that kind of consistency and reliability and durability, then you end up on a lot of these all-time lists. And although Dan Issel didn't have the prime that a lot of these other guys had, but this consistency is what puts him up here. And actually, in the ABA, he was quite dominant, right? So he's like 5-time All-ABA, considered one of the best players in the ABA of his time, right? Along with at his position, I think only George McGinnis would be comparable. Hard to choose between McGinnis and Issel, but yeah, both of them I think would be in the top 10 to 20 range. Just the careers, I think if you look at the totality of the careers, this is where they end up. Okay, now all these other guys, this is interesting. Kevin Love, I'm going to put down here because I think Kevin Love, uh, although he's a great rebounder and he had really good stats when he was in Minnesota, but once he came to Cleveland, he kind of declined a bit, became the third option for LeBron and the Kyrie Cavs. Um, Decent shooter and a really good rebounder, but not really an alpha dog player. Um, as we've seen in Minnesota, he was the best player, but he didn't win anything as the best player. And then after he came to the Cavs, he became the third best option, which is where he won. And then after LeBron left and Kyrie left, he became the best option for the Cavs, but they didn't really go anywhere. So I guess you can see already from this that Kevin Love can't be the best player for his team, or even the second option for his team, right? He can only win when he's like the third option. So although he's good stats and good rebounding is what puts him down here, but I can't put him really higher than that. And the same thing for Draymond Green. Draymond Green, I can't put him up here because kind of like a third option guy. He can't really be the alpha dog, can't be the second option. Good defender, and can get you those triple doubles and stuff. Good at rebounding and passing. I think he actually averaged more assists than Curry did during a few seasons. So yeah, very good all-around player and a good defender, but just not an offensive option and not the type of guy that can lead a team. Just a type of guy that can be a solid role player and contributor. So I put Draymond Green with Kevin Love. Both of these guys just solid third options that you like to have in your team, but they can't be your first or second option. And then the rest of the guys would go here, top 20, 30. So Bobby Jones, all-time great defensive player. So yeah, he's like 11-time all-defensive, which is amazing. Definitely one of the greatest defenders ever. I wouldn't say he's up there with Scottie Pippen or Dennis Rodman, but he's close. At least one-on-one, he's a good defender. So yeah, definitely Bobby Jones deserves to be up here. Also one of the best six men ever as well. Blake Griffin also here as well. Would be a lot better if he didn't have the injuries and stuff, but at this prime, at Blake Griffin's prime, I think, is probably as good as any of these guys. He was a great scorer, rebounder, and passer, especially in his prime. But it's just the shortness of his career due to all these injuries and stuff like that. Let's put some down here. But I do think, yeah, and dunker as well. So Blake Griffin also, obviously good dunker as well. But yeah, I think for those reasons, that's why I'll put Blake Griffin here. It just is, if he played out his career without all those injuries, I think he'd be a lot higher. Dennis Rodman has to be here as well. Although Dennis Rodman as a defender is probably better than any of these guys, except for maybe Garnett or maybe Duncan. But I think probably they're better defender than any of these guys. And of course, better rebounder. Probably better rebounder than any of these guys, except for maybe Jerry Lucas. Rodman is all-time great rebounder, all-time great defender, but his offense game, he doesn't have an offensive game, so that's why I had to put him down here, right? He's not really a complete player. He's really, really good on one side of the court, like one side of the ball game is defense, and he's really good at that. But because he doesn't really have an offensive game, so I have to put him here. But he's still all-time great, right? So I got to put him here as well. Chris Webber. Again, they're very similar to Griffin. I think Chris Webber, in his prime, was probably as good as these guys, or even better. Just a great scorer, rebounder, and passer, just like Griffin was. Probably slightly better than Griffin in his prime, actually. But again, because his career was cut short by injuries and stuff like that, he couldn't extend his career that much. That's why he ends up here, right? Just like a level below these guys. But this is where I would put Chris Webber as well. And Tom Heinsohn, what most people don't know is that Tom Heinsohn was actually the leading scorer for a lot of those Celtics playoffs. So him and Sam Jones and later on John Havlicek would be the leading scorer for a lot of those teams. But you're talking about a guy who won 8 championships in 9 years. Like his entire career was just 9 seasons long, and he won 8 championships and went to the finals every single year of his career. So if you're talking about that level of success, Tom Heinsohn has to be up here. He wasn't a great shooter or anything. He wasn't very efficient. But just in terms of the success that he had as probably the second best player or third best player on his team after Bill Russell, that's why he has to be here. Actually, I want to make another change here. Chris Webber, I think, is actually a little bit better than here. I know I said he was like a, like Blake Griffin, but he's actually a bit better than Blake Griffin. I'm sure most people would agree. And he came very close to reaching the finals because he was, a lot of people say that the game against the Kings versus the Lakers was rigged. A lot of refs, the calls were very, sketchy. And so Webber, a lot of people believe was robbed of a finals trip or a finals appearance, and of a ring basically, because the 2002 Nets weren't a very obviously it wasn't a very great team. So I think the Kings could have easily won that finals if they beat the Lakers. Anyways, all this is to say that Chris Webber is actually a little bit better than this. I'm actually going to take down Bailey Howell, even though I said Bailey Howell I actually originally had in this area, and I'm going to put him back here. Even though he's very close to the top 10 or 20, I'm going to move him a bit down here because, like I said, he's not as good at rebounding as Jerry Lucas. Not quite as good of a shooter as Lucas, although he's pretty good for his time, and not good of a defender as Dave DeBusschere was. So he's just slightly below both of those guys for his time. So I'm going to move Bailey Howell down here, and I'm going to put Chris Webber in the 10 to 20 range, which I think is where he belongs. So yeah, even though Chris Webber's career was cut short, I do believe he is a bit better than Blake Griffin and Bailey Howell. So yeah, I think if he definitely had a longer prime, he would be considered. Actually, I think he's a huge snub from the Hall of Fame, right? That's probably my biggest snub from the Hall of Fame is Chris Webber. But I think he definitely, if he played out his entire career, he might have even had a chance at the top 10, right? But I think he definitely deserves to be in the top 10 to 20 range. All right, so for the greatest PFs all time, I'm going to make a small change here with my new requirement that you had to have at least 2 All-Star appearances. Sorry, Horace Grant. I mean, Horace Grant is one of the most underrated, underappreciated players, I think. Great defensive player, great role player, and a part of 4 championship teams. But because he only has 1 All-Star appearance, I have to take him out. And I'm going to put in Paul Silas, who is a 2-time All-Star. Also, kind of like Horace Grant, he wasn't a great offensive player, but for his defensive prowess and his rebounding, that's pretty much what he's known for and where he contributed. Also a great role player, also a great third option, just like Horace Grant, but he has 1 more All-Star appearance, so that's why I'm putting Paul Silas over Horace Grant. So Silas was a huge part of those championship teams for both the Celtics and the Supersonics. So yeah, I mean, it's close, right? Horace Grant versus Paul Silas. Silas has 1 more All-Star appearance. That's why I'm going to put him in here. But yeah, that's a change I wanted to make. Everything else is going to remain the same for my top 40. All right, guys. So anyways, that's my ranking of the power forwards, the greatest power forwards of all time. And yeah, that's it. Next video, I'm going to do the centers and finish the series off. But I hope you guys enjoyed that. And as always, thanks for watching.